people are not looking to hire the next Picasso. People are not looking for you to like create something that's going to blow their minds. They need something functionally that is going to serve their marketing purposes, that's going to look aesthetically pleasing, and they're going to see it in such a better light than you are. They're going to go, this is amazing. And I look at things and go, it's okay.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh,
it's
wow.
not about the value you ascribe to your work. It's about the value that they have in your work and what it's worth to them and their marketing and their bottom line.
This is your host, Dyutama, but you can call me DJ. And I love to inspire food photographers to dream. I spent 15 years as an architect studying buildings and constructing hospitals before taking the biggest leap of faith of my life, which was setting up a food styling and food photography business right from scratch. If you're a dreamer like me, wanting to start a new photography business or grow your existing food photography business, jump right into a world where I share practical, actionable strategies to improve your photography skills, to work with clients, make more money, all with a fearless mindset. This is the My Food Lens podcast, and we take you one step closer to your dreams. So let's go. I'm so pumped for my conversation today because it is with one of my favorite food photographers, one of my favorite people in the industry, and she is Joanie Simon from The Bite Shot. Now, for those who don't know Joanie, she's a commercial food photographer, she's a stylist, a content creator, she's a published author and an educator. She's based in Phoenix, Arizona, and boy, she is a fireball. She's a fireball of energy. So she's a fireball of knowledge. And today she's going to talk to us about something so important, something that actually stops us from building a business, something that stalls us from unleashing the complete success of our business, something that keeps us awake at night, gives us sleepless nights, something that overwhelms us, it frustrates us. Something that is the foundation of our business. It is the key to running a successful business. It is the key to running a business altogether. She's going to come and talk to us about pricing. We're going to be talking about money. We're going to be talking about value, and we're going to talk about what it takes to set up the pricing, the rates in your business. How do you talk to clients? What kind of work should you do? What kind of work should you not do? So Joanie is a powerhouse. She's a powerhouse of knowledge, of information. She's been in the market for years, and she's going to leave us with so much information so that at the end of this episode, you're no longer overwhelmed and you're no longer left with, all those questions. You have a bit more clarity to take that first step, to reach out to that client, to increase your rates, to negotiate, to do whatever you need to do in terms of pricing for your business. All right, with that, please welcome with me the most fun, vivacious, amazing, talented, radiant Joanie Simon. Hi, Joanie, and welcome to My Food Lens podcast. Oh my God, I am absolutely delighted to have you because you're hands down one of my favorite food photographers. So thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, the pleasure is all mine. I have followed you also on social media and have listened to the podcast, and I just really love the stories that you're putting out there and the enthusiasm that you share and like how encouraging you are for people's journeys. And so I'm super appreciative of everything that you're doing as well.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Oh, wow. You just lifted my day so much more. But I think, Joanie, I feel like I know you so much. So we all know that you're such a brilliant food photographer, right? We also know that you have built your business from scratch and you're running it so successfully. I also know a little bit about your personal story, your battle with alcohol, and how you've just powered through it and been such a trooper. And we all have seen this bright, vibrant, positive, radiant energy that you bring to the screen. Every time you show up in Instagram stories, every time you're on the feed, you just light our day up. So I feel like I kind of know you a little bit, but I think it'll be very fun. Yeah, well, say it.
That's the case, though. It's so funny when we follow people on social media because I feel the same way about a lot of people. And I'm like, Oh, you've never met me, but I know more about you than probably my family does.
Yeah, exactly. I feel like, your emails, your posts, and you're just always so honest and genuine. I feel like we've known you, at least I've been seeing you for many years now. And I really feel that, oh yeah, that's Joanie. That's totally Joanie. Like I can anticipate what's coming next. And that's why I want to break that a little bit. I want to start with something very fun. I want to start with something that we might not know about you, that you might not have shared with us, and, kind of want to know you just a little bit better before we deep dive into the whole world of pricing. So what do you think? You want to share something with us?
Absolutely. So the thing that comes to mind that I don't share a lot, but it is interesting how in life, we kind of set out on a path and you have these ideas about what you want to be when you grow up. And so when I was getting ready to graduate from high school and go out to college, I was on a mission to become a newscaster. Like I wanted to be an anchor on television, telling people the news, but I had no interest in journalism, which
Oh, wow.
on TV and telling the news. I don't know. There was just something about that. And so it's so funny because I then went off to college and spent a semester learning broadcast journalism. And I was like, I am not cut out for this. These people are too serious. This is too cutthroat. And this is not my cup of tea. So then I went and studied art history instead, which was great. But, it's so funny to think that there were still those little nuggets of like, okay, maybe I'm not at a television station, but I've effectively built my own television station right out of my home. So it is really interesting to see how like those little things that we have in the back of our minds, and then at some point they may come full circle. So I think that's a really fun little fact.
Well, I'm so glad you didn't go that route because you're totally made for this. And I can totally see your screen presence. So you're definitely made for, everywhere that you show up on your YouTube and yeah, I think this is more interesting though. Nice choice.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Joanie. I think that's a nice little nuggets and, I'm not going to forget that. All right. So I'm going to dig in. I know that, we are going to talk about something so intense, so awkward, so overwhelming today because it's definitely such a huge part of running a photography business. And it's probably one of the biggest question marks, something that, stops people from really digging into or finding their true potential in their business, and it's money, it's pricing. So I'm going to jump right into how did you start and what is the first thing you did as you set yourself up as a commercial food photographer?
Yeah. Well, it's so funny because, I would say my journey toward becoming a food photographer in a professional capacity was somewhat on accident. It was one of those things where I was doing photography and doing food photography. And then suddenly a restaurant who I had connected with was like, oh, can you come photograph our menu? You're obviously a food photographer. And I'm like, I am? Oh, okay. And so I called up one of my friends who works in PR, public relations. She has her own firm here in Phoenix. And she represents, different restaurants. And she also had, new photographers and things like that. So I'm like, what do I even charge a restaurant to do food photography? Like, what do I ask? And I honestly don't remember what she told me or what I charged. I was keeping track of everything by hand in those days. So I honestly don't remember what I charged, but it was definitely like less than a couple $100 for a couple of hours shoot. But it was interesting because I thought, oh, there's money in this. This is an interesting opportunity because I was at the time really trying to become a food blogger. That was where I was really focused, is recipe food blogging. And so I really hadn't considered the photography side of things. And it was really interesting too, because prior to, pursuing this world of food blogging and content creation, I had worked for the family business working in sales. And then I'd worked my way up to sales manager and then the general manager. And so I had a lot of business skills and knew how to charge $20,000 for a computer system and all of, kind of those business to business prices. And that made sense in that realm. But for some reason, there was this disconnect for me when I left that corporate job and came and was running my own business. For some reason, I was like, well, yeah, I can charge $20,000 for a computer system to a restaurant, but I don't feel comfortable asking more than a couple $100 for photos, right? And part of that is because I think our photography is so personal and we feel so connected to it. So it's an interesting, and of course we all know we're our own worst critics. And so it was really interesting that I did not make that immediate connection to pricing. But it was definitely, I had been doing the work and started picking up clients and networking and making connections because of, again, sort of my background. Having been in sales, I was sort of trained to do a certain amount of those things. And so it kind of came a bit more naturally then in that sense. And as I started to get hired by more and more clients, I looked at my bottom line and I'm like, there's no way I can replace a 6-figure salary running around charging $200 and $300 for a photo shoot or for a video. Because if we're being honest, and we think about, okay, well, maybe a shoot's only going to take us a half a day, but you're not going to then just go out and work another gig on that other half a day. So you really got to think about what's realistic in terms of your time and your financial goals. Mm-hmm. And so then there was sort of this realization, and I think also reality kind of strikes at a certain point, because I really did. I did not have a safety net when I left my full-time job, and my husband had been stay at home with our kids up until that point. Now he did, when I left my job, he went back into real estate, and we were very fortunate that there was a couple opportunities that came and he was able to close some business to kind of keep us afloat. But I remember we were running lean and I was like, what is going to happen? But I also am very grateful for that, because I think that sometimes, and I don't think this is for everybody, but for me, there's nothing like some real motivation to get you out there and figuring these things out. I was like, I have to figure it out. There's no backup plan. Like, we have to make this happen. The bank account is dwindling and I got to make some money. And so then that's when I, started really seeking out and understanding, because I think I had also I knew a lot of consumer photographers. I knew people who photographed for weddings and families and portrait sessions. And I knew what those people had also charged me for those services, but I was like, that doesn't translate here. And so that's when I just got on the Google and got on the internet and started searching, and there wasn't a lot of information out there. People were not transparent with their prices. I felt like I was always, people would say, I'd ask them, how do you charge for this? And they would go, oh, well, it's complicated, right? So I was like, okay. And so it took me a long time, a lot longer than I'd wished it had. But, that's the hard-won battle of going through it and figuring it out and now having a really good, solid understanding. But it was a journey.
Yeah, it sounds like. And it also sounds like, usually when photographers start a business, they know more about photography than they do about business, but it seemed like you really came from a very business mindset. I mean, even though you say that you didn't know how to apply it, in your subconscious, there's always this part where you know how to drive the business. You know a little bit to navigate. It's not 100% unfamiliar territory. But of course, the pricing is such a struggle because it's all over the place. No one shares their rates. Google is useless. And it's such a struggle. So you've just shared the journey of every photographer and how they begin with pricing. Wow. So it seems like even though you were connected to the F&B industry, it wasn't like it just struck you and you were like, oh yeah, I've seen this. This is how we go. You took your own time and it was your own struggle as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of trial and error and a lot of realizing, oh, there's a lot more money in this than I knew. And I think that that's where things really opened up for me, is then suddenly having conversations with people and feeling bold enough to ask the budget question, which again, I had been trained. I mean, I went through professional sales training as a salesperson. I taught sales trainings, but for some reason there was like this disconnect in my business. And again, I think it's a lot of that insecurity. There was a long time when I was very insecure about my work and this feeling of, well, I'm not really a photographer. I'm just a hack. They're going to find me out. Right. And I think it's really important that it's as much about developing a knowledge of how things work and what you can charge and what is possible, but also having just the confidence to know that, the thing that I just want to, sometimes I want to shake people and I go, your work is amazing. Like you have built this out to be way bigger of a hill in terms of, thinking that they have so much further to go in terms of their photography education and learning and skills. And I'm like, you are so much further up this hill than like it's not at the end of the day, like, yes, photography skills at a baseline level are important, but people are not looking to hire the next Picasso. People are not looking for you to like create something that's going to blow their minds. They need something functionally that is going to serve their marketing purposes, that's going to look aesthetically pleasing. And they're going to see it in such a better light than you are. They're going to go, this is amazing. And I look at things and go, it's okay. You know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Oh,
It's
wow.
not about the value you ascribe to your work. It's about the value that they have in your work and what it's worth to them and their marketing and their bottom line.
So would you say that to start with pricing, like what would be a good place for someone to get started with pricing? Reach out, talk to people? What do you suggest, Joanie?
Yeah, I mean, definitely getting in, connecting with other people and just kind of being transparent. I do think that, folks like yourself and me and other educators in this space have been much more transparent. Rachel Korenek, I know, has done a lot on pricing as well. And I just get so excited about that because I'm like, the more people that we can communicate these messages to, the better. But I think for me, whenever somebody's like, oh, how do I know what to charge? And I mean, there is definitely from the standpoint of when I'm pricing a job, I'm approaching that as a custom job, right? Each job that lands on my desk is we're starting and kind of evaluating, well, what are the needs of this business? What's the size of this business? What is the value of an image? You kind of think about a photo. And if we had a single photo and the value of that photo to a small mom and pop restaurant versus that same exact photo and the value that it has for McDonald's. Right. And so think about that image. It's the same image, but it's going to drive so much more business and so much more value to the larger corporation versus the small mom and pop restaurant. And so it's not as much about the inherent worth of the photo itself. It's about the value that it contains for that end user. So that's why when we're talking about commercial photography, it's as much about understanding what we're creating for them as much as it is understanding who we're creating this for and how they're going to use it. And so, but at the end of the day, what I always say and come back to, because I think that it can get very overwhelming to get into the complexities and the nuances of licensing and usage and all these other things, right? Like you just go, oh my God, I don't even know, like, whoa. And so I say, don't worry about that for now. Just let's start at base level. Let's just think about how much time it's going to take you to do something, right? So somebody wants you to photograph their restaurant menu and it's 6 dishes. And so you're going to go in and you're like, okay, well, if I'm realistic about that, and maybe you don't know how long that'll take you, but for me, I would say it'll probably take me about an hour and a half to 2 hours, depending again on, are we styling things or are we just shooting what they're bringing out of the kitchen? But maybe 2 hours. But then we start to think, okay, well, wait a minute. What about like all the conversations that we have to have with the client beforehand to plan this photo shoot? So there's an hour-ish. And then maybe it's 20 minutes from your house. And so then you got to drive there and you got to drive home and you got to pack up all your gear. And then you got to unpack all your gear. And then you got to transfer all the files. And then we all, right? Like all the things. And so you start counting and you're like, oh, okay, that's actually like maybe it's only an hour and a half on site, but in reality, like that's an 8-hour project. And so then you go, okay, well then what's the value of an hour of my time? And this is going to be different for everybody in terms of where you live geographically. Like for me, in terms of my overhead, my cost of living and just general pricing is less expensive than it is in New York City, right? I'm in a more suburban area. And so kind of understanding that scale. But at the end of the day, like my sort of like baseline is if I'm like, you're not sure where you are, just $100. And granted too, like again, globally, because I'd be interested to know, like from a Singapore, like how does that translate? I think there's a lot of nuance to Europe and to Asia. And so understanding too, just your own personal market. And some of that is networking. But from a US perspective in that standard, I'd say if you're charging less than $100, you're definitely leaving money on the table, even for bigger operations. And so, okay, an 8-hour shoot and I'm, in total for that project and I'm going to be charging at $100 an hour. So there's $800. So at least my time is covered for. And then any sort of expenses that go along with that. Like, do I have to buy backdrops? Do I need to purchase, special things? Am I bringing extra things? Are there extra props? And even like the rental of your props. Like some of us, have this problem called props acquisition syndrome, and we have a lot of props. And so if we were a prop rental place, like there's prop houses everywhere.
Yeah.
If we were renting those out, what would we charge? Well, usually it's around 10% of retail value. So you go, okay, well, if I'm going to be using my props, then I should be compensated for that. And so, but as a baseline, I always say, start with your time. Just think about, don't worry about the licensing. Don't think about all these other complicated things. Just start that baseline of really making sure your overhead is covered in terms of your time. And then as you start to get confident with that and you get a sense of because sometimes too, starting out, you're like, well, I don't know how long it takes me to do a restaurant shoot. So that's where you kind of have to just start paying attention. Like you kind of estimate it and say, okay, I think it's going to be this. And then you go, whoa, that took me a lot longer than I thought. Or maybe it didn't take you as long as you thought, right? So it's not about getting it perfect. It's about adjusting over time. And then once you've got that at a solid place, then layering on these expenses. And then once you're ready to, venture into the dark side or whatever we want to call it, the world of licensing. But that's really only going to apply to when you start working with those larger, internationally distributed brands. That's where that's really going to come into play as well. So, does that kind of?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's such good advice because you really want to keep it simple and, you don't want to overcomplicate it right in the beginning. There's so many other things to think about, and pricing is always one of the biggest chunks. It's like a little lump in the throat. You just want to get rid of it. So just starting simple, the best thing, like it's what works for you. Start there. So I love that you touched on, how you layer it as you move forward in your journey. But tell us a few different ways, Joanie, how you would price photography work, because I know that there are some practices you like more than others. For example, pricing per photo, pricing by the hour, for half day, full day. I know that we all have I never do this and I always do this. So some practices are more preferable than the others. Can you tell us what are the different ways that someone can price their work and which practices might be a bit more preferable?
Yeah. It's interesting because folks say the idea of charging per photo. And I guess I've just never been able to wrap my mind around how they actually price that and do it in a way that's profitable. Because to me, there are shoots where we did a photo shoot a number of weeks ago for some packaging, and we ended up doing 4 photos in a day. But it took an extensive crew and there was a lot that went into it. And it's a really big company. So there was a lot of licensing to it. So, 4 photos, we're talking if I break that down, it's about $2,500 a photo. Okay. Yeah. But then I think about, then I go to a small mom and pop restaurant and I can blitz through and do 100 photos in 2 hours, So then it's I never could figure out I would love to know the folks who do charge per photo, how they do that. Cause I don't know I've not been able to figure that one out. The one that I definitely do sometimes that I think makes a lot of sense in situations where you're doing per dish or per recipe, because to me, that's more quantifiable. Like if I know that we're doing 4 recipes or we're going to be doing 6 recipes, I can start to get a sense of the time. And then I can also based on that, tell the client, okay, well then based on, how many photos do you want for each recipe? And so definitely have packaged it that way, or for restaurants as well. You say, okay, well, it's going to be X per dish. And then if they want to add more dishes, great. If they want to take dishes away. But to me, it always comes back to knowing what sort of somebody's given me an idea of what we're going to be doing. I get that sense of that project. And then I come up with, okay, what's my bottom line again for my time, my expenses? And then, okay, how do I want to divide this up? I could take that sum total and divide it by 6 dishes. And so here's your per dish price. Or I package it as, one lump package sum. That's a way that certainly photographers do that. You want all of this all-inclusive package, if you will. And here's the bottom line for that. Whereas you can certainly too decide if you want to break certain things out. I am a fan as of late, and I feel like I am always still experimenting. It is really interesting. The longer you do these things, you go, why doesn't just make this little change or this little adjustment? How will people react to that? And, one of the things, for example, that I've started to break out in my estimates is, I've always got represented my time and my expenses. And so for a good long time, I would just lump the time together as like one lump sum. Like, here's my photographer's fee, and this covers everything soup to nuts from planning all the way through the shoot, through post-production. But at a certain point, I was like, you know what? It would be, and this is again, personal preference. I think that I think you need to go with the pricing model that you feel most confident delivering and communicating to the client. And for me, though, I felt more confident if I broke out the pre-production time, the shooting time, and the post-production time. Because to me, then suddenly they're ascribing some value to the time that I'm investing with them prior to the photo shoot. And they're going, oh, we don't just show up on shoot day and just run. Like, no, there's as much time, if not more, going on before the photo shoot even happens. And then breaking out the post-production time as far as my editing time, so that they're really seeing those as separate blocks. That's personally worked well for me and the kinds of clients that I serve.
So do you even price them separately according to stages? Like, would you have a figure for each stage? Or, the reason I'm asking is because I do something similar, but I don't call out the price of every stage. So I would say, oh yeah, pre-production meeting, blah, 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 all of that. And then the photo shoot and then the post-processing. I would call it out so they understand the process, but it's still a lump sum. So I'm curious whether you actually break down the fee also according to the stages.
Yeah, that's what I've started to do is, so yeah, here's your price for pre-production, here's your price for the shoot, and then here's your price for the post-production. And usually what I've been doing with the post-production, and this is more applicable in situations where I'm working with, I would say, a bigger company, a bigger brand, and they are purchasing a specific number of images, that agreement is, here is your package price, and that is going to get you this many final images, as opposed to like, maybe I'm shooting for a blogger or I'm shooting for a restaurant, and then I'm saying, I'm going to deliver a gallery to you of final images that, so then it's a bit more flexible. And then I'm also not breaking out and being so particular. So this is where it's sort of the nuance of it's as much about my own confidence level as it is about what's going to resonate with the client the most. And so like, a blogger, they go, well, why do we need each of these individual line items? That feels overwhelming. I just want to see one lump sum. Great. Whereas, a bigger company, they want to see that sort of broken out so that then too, they can know, okay, well then if we add 5 more photos, then what's that going to do to our price overall? And so we can kind of scale that up and scale that down.
Okay, interesting. So we talked about per photo price. How about half day, full day, hourly? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I did some of those early on, and I just always felt like I ended up on the short end of those deals. And I think part of it too is I had this very traumatic photo shoot early on. It was for a catering company. I don't even know if they're still around, but I was like, this was when I was still trying to figure out my pricing model. And I was like, okay, maybe I'm supposed to charge per hour. Maybe that's the way I'm supposed to do it. So I told them, I can't remember what the price was, but I said, we're going to do it per hour. And they're like, great. And so I show up. And there was no pre-production in my process at that point either yet. I didn't know pre-production was a thing. I was just showing up. And so I show up and they're like, all right. And they just start throwing food at me. And it was
wow.
Come in fast and hard. And you knew that they were trying to get as many dishes as they could out of me in like an hour. It was bonkers. And of course, I also didn't have the confidence to go, whoa, what are we doing? This is where it's like, oh, this is why we have a pre-production process. So we can all have an understanding and we have a better vetted sales process. So we have these communications. So perhaps there is a way to do that if you are setting those expectations from the outset of we're going to do this per hour, or you get a half day or what have you, as long as there is an understanding then from their part. Because I'm sure I could go find those photos somewhere stuck on a hard drive, and they're horrible because you're also not going to do your best work shooting at that pace. And so it's as much about, I think, really, one of the things when it comes to pricing, I think so much of what can set you up for success is just being confident enough, having the confidence to have those conversations earlier, as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to charge per hour and just hope that they know what that looks like. You got to really, is where we step into our business owner role and go, okay, I am responsible for taking ownership of communicating this and helping them understand how I run my business, because our clients are not photographers. They don't know how the business works. They're just going to do what makes sense to them. But if we can take the reins and, it's not like you have to come in guns a-blazing. You can do this in a very friendly, relational manner, but helping them know, here's how we are all going to win in this situation. I'm going to give you the best photos you've ever had because we're going to set this up for success. Here's how we do this. This is what you can do to help me ensure that I deliver the best final product to you. It's always appealing to that what's in it for them factor in that sales process. So,
and I just love that you bring up the point that, clients don't always know the process. It has happened so often that clients have come in with this vision of a photo shoot where they feel like, I literally have to put the camera and take the shot. They're not familiar with the lighting setup. They don't know how much time it takes. And they're like, yeah, just take a top down, then take this angle and and then you're like, I need to change this. I need to change that. Everything is time. Everything is a new shot. So I feel like the conversation with the client, the pre-production part is actually the foundation to you being able to do your job well and for the client to get the best results from you. Which brings me to my next question, Joanie. It's beautifully segued into that. And it's not, you said it, it's not a cookie cutter approach. And more than the project, it really matters who we are, photographing for. So can you share with us some of the very important questions that go into the pre-production phase that we must ask the client before we even get into the whole money conversation?
Yeah. So definitely. So yeah, when I, somebody reaches out to me for photography and I say, great, let's get on, the discovery call. Cause usually the pre-production call that I'm doing, that's going to be after they've already signed and we're planning the photo shoot. So that discovery call, definitely, there's a lot of good questions to ask in there to understand what is it they're looking for, and thinking about, well, first of all, what are we photographing, and getting a sense too. It is so interesting in today's day and age that there's so many more companies that need photography and need it for social media. It's not just for the big companies anymore. It's kind of, there's so much out there. True. And so really understanding how much do they already have in mind going into this, and how much do they need your help in kind of coming up with the ideas and the plan? Like, do they have a vision for their photo shoot, or do they, especially smaller brands, smaller companies, restaurants, they know they need photos, but they don't really know anything other than that. They're like, you're a photographer, I need photos. Great, let's go. And so it can be a bit of a challenge if you're not anticipating the fact that, now we might need to coach them through and say, okay, well, let's think about, where are you planning to use these images? Are these images intended for social media? Is this like Instagram and Facebook stuff? Or is this your website? Are you sending this out as public relations materials for getting coverage? Or is this like a very specific intent? Because that's going to really help you understand, okay, well, based on that information, then, well, how do you want to package that? How many photos do you need based on that? Because to me, if I understand where are we planning to use these photos, not just from the standpoint of certainly licensing those, but really understanding just what's it going to take to produce that? Because you think about, you were talking about, we're going to go from head-on shots to overhead to vertical to horizontal, like you're going to need to adjust and make changes. And so knowing, like, if the client says, no, everything is 100% for Instagram, it's going to be all 4x5 and it's all going to be at the 3, but a lot of clients may not have that level of detail. And so knowing how much you need to fill in the gaps, because I know that if I'm going to end up doing a lot of that not necessarily planning, but helping to art direct is, the idea of helping them come up with the shot list. Am I going to be coming up with the mood boards and the inspiration so that we can get on the same page as to visually what you're looking for? I need to be charging for that time, because there's definitely clients out there. Well, they are going to know exactly what they want. Here are the image specs. Here's what the mood boards look like. Here's your shot list, like bing, bang, boom. They've got it all.
Yes.
And so that's going to take me less time than on that front. And so, so just kind of getting a sense, like, what do you have in mind that we're going to photograph? And what are we photographing? Are we photographing products? Are we photographing recipes? And whose recipes are those? Are those your recipes that you're going to provide? Or these, do you need me to do recipe development? Now, I don't do that, but I definitely know a lot of food photographers out there who also offer that service. So you would want to know. And then, how many final images? Because as much as, maybe we're not charging per image in a package, I still want to know, even if I'm shooting a gallery, I want to have an expectation of, well, are they imagining they're going to get 20 photos or are they going to get 100 photos? Because it's going to take me a lot longer to edit 100 photos than it is 20. And so having that really, just those specific details of things that you would want to know further down the line that don't get lost in translation. How many dishes are we photographing and how many then images per dish? And is that just hero shots or is that process shots?
Right.
Those kind of questions really help, as well as just understanding creatively if they have an idea of what they're imagining. Like, are we going for ideas of things that you've seen in magazines, even having them provide for you images that, they've seen that they want to use as inspiration, because then too, you go, oh, well, that is a whole lot of antique props and these particular surfaces, and I have none of those. So now that means, well, I'm going to have to source those. And, you're starting to think in the back of your mind, okay, so I'm going to have to go find those props and all that other stuff. And so again, you're thinking about the time and the expenses. So just based on that vision that they have. But if it's, all on white seamless backdrops and you have a white seamless backdrop and it's all at the same angle. So that's where you can start to really understand just based on the vision that they have. Also knowing where is the photo shoot happening. I never, it's happening in my place. Is this happening at your place? Is this happening somewhere else? Also, how many people are going to be coming? Is the client going to be with you, or is this something they're going to be doing remotely? Having that conversation is really helpful too, so that you can understand as you're setting up for the shoot, how do we ensure our communication is solid throughout the process? So,
I think just everything that goes into conducting that photo shoot, right? So your venue and the number of dishes and who's cooking the dishes, whether you have a food stylist, you are in charge of food styling, who's preparing the art direction. So I'm just recapping what you've said, Joanie. So, the art direction, and then where are they going to use the images? How many photos are they looking for? And then the concept. I think you brought up such a great point. I always ask my clients to send me one image. Just pick one thing from the internet and just share it with me so that I understand your vision and the level of detail that you're looking for. Some of them want this whole table full of food and 20 hands coming in. Some of them want that one masterpiece of a shot, of that one plate that's put together by the Michelin star chef. And that's a different ball game by itself. So just knowing exactly what the vision is, where you're doing the shoot, what are your overheads, where are they going to use the images, and I think primarily how many shots they really have in mind. That is such a big deal. Wow. How about overtime, Joanie? What do you think of that? Do you ever charge for overtime? And do you think it's good practice? Not so much. What are your thoughts?
Yeah. So, in the way that I do estimates, and this works well for, again, the kinds of clients that I serve and the work that I do, and just sort of how I present my packages overall, is it is a package price. So I'm not guaranteeing a certain amount of hours. Like, you're not going to see in the estimate overall, like you might see like, oh, we're going to have 2 shoot days or 1 shoot day or whatever, but there's not like a clock necessarily running. It's important to me to disconnect like the amount of time from the package, that it's more about the value of what they're getting, as opposed to, counting the hours. Because that's the other thing too. Like, the more experience you have as a photographer, the faster you're going to be. And I just don't believe you should be penalized for being fast. So if I can get it done faster, well, guess what? That's because I've spent years learning this thing and I've invested in the education. So with that, just sort of like, again, separating that time factor. So then it's not that they're sitting there realizing, oh, we're going to go overtime. Like, to me, I'm estimating a job to get somewhere in the ballpark. Sometimes I win, sometimes I lose, but I'm never so far off that I'm resentful or frustrated, things like that. But if it is something though, where it is a change of the project overall, like suddenly they have added an entire setup that we were not planning to do that day, or maybe they're like, oh, let's run in a completely different direction than what we had discussed in all of our planning. That's then when I say, hey, for example, we were shooting some packaging a couple months ago, and the plan was to shoot just the final hero, like the food itself. Like, here it is in a bowl. That's what's going to go on the front of the package. And then about a day before the shoot, they were like, oh my gosh, we decided we also want like little ingredients sort of like on the back of the package. And, we looked at stock, but we really want something very specific. And so it's just, we need cinnamon sticks on a white backdrop and, some like ingredient stuff. So you're like, oh, can we go ahead and do that? I was like, totally, 100% would love to do that. It will probably have to happen the day after the shoot. And first of all, are you okay with that? Knowing that the client was flying in and then they would be gone for that. And they were like, yeah. And I said, and so because that is extra time, and that's also going to be extra retouching time for me, just want to make sure that you understand that that's going to impact the final invoice. And, I'm happy to provide you the pricing for that. And they're like, oh yeah, totally. We're good. I'm like, great. So then that conversation's been had. And so I think that's why, again, it's really important in that discovery call and when you're putting together the estimate, just to be explicitly clear about what this includes and what, not necessarily what it doesn't include, but what is in there, and suddenly you go, oh, well, see, this is more than what we had said it is. So that's why the price is going to change. And as long as you're having that conversation, and it is scary because I remember the first time that, a client did that, because that happens, suddenly they get an idea and they're like, oh, wait, and we need this too. And I just remember going, gulp. And it was like, we were on set when it happened and the client was with me and I'm like, okay, Joanie, this is when you got to put your big girl pants on and we're just going to have this conversation. And I probably was super awkward about it, but I did it anyway, right? Because it's not about being super suave and doing it, because the more times you do it, it's like exposure therapy, right? Like just like rip the Band-Aid off and it's okay if it's awkward, it's fine. And I mean, then I just told the client, I'm like, so, we're adding extra things and this is going to take me a lot more time in post. And so I just need you to know that if you want to continue doing this and adding these shots, it's going to cost extra time. Are you okay with that? Again, like just being transparent. And he was like, oh, I didn't even think of that. He's like, well, yeah, no, we need these shots. I'm like, great. Okay, cool. So then, it's just having that conversation. And I think when it comes to money, because the other part I think that makes money so hard is that, I don't know anybody who doesn't feel some sort of weirdness about money. Like everybody
so true
about money. And so it's like, but you also got to think like, guess what? Our clients feel weird about money too. And so it's like, hey, we're all in this together. We all feel weird about this. So like, let's just talk it out, as opposed to, because the thing that will happen is if you don't call that out, I always think about what's the future long-term, like it's going to come up at some point, and either you're going to sweep it under the rug and you're going to become resentful, not for charging for it. Or, the client's going to think that that's normal. And then you're building up this poor long-term relationship. It's like, it's just like relationships in general, right? Like if something's happening, then you just call it out and you deal with it so that it's going to save you heartache later on. Because it's harder to deal with the longer you wait. And so, in terms of overtime and things like that, I definitely know that for folks who may be working on larger sets where it really is like by the day and by the time, and if suddenly we're going into overtime and things like that, absolutely. I think it's just a matter of what's the model that works well for you and what's been communicated with the client ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. I just feel like having that open communication is so important because you're setting the pace. There's 90% chance that client is going to come back to you. It's, they're going to be a returning client, and you really want to set the pace, moving forward. And most of the times clients really understand. If they're the right client, if they're reasonable, they will understand. So Joanie, I want to talk about something interesting, and it's been on my mind. I've been like waiting for this moment to talk to you about it. It's about an email that you sent out last month, and it's about the estimate that changed everything. And the reason I want you to tell us that story is because many times we don't understand whether we are undercharging or we are overcharging. We're sending out a quote and we're like, oh my God, I don't know what this is. Am I bidding low or high? Am I going to get the job? Am I not? So kind of the moral of the story is that, if you can leave us with what are the indicators to look out for, whether you're overcharging or undercharging, how do you get to know that? But start us with that amazing story, please.
Now, did you have a blast listening to Joanie or not? She has really enlightened us, and I'm sure that, you've had a ton of aha moments. That woman is a powerhouse. I love Joanie. She has like so much wisdom and so much practical knowledge to share with us. I'm sure you've enjoyed it so far. Well, this is just part one of the part two series of pricing with Joanie Simon. So stay tuned for next week because she shares even bigger and better truths and practical strategies for us to level up our pricing, to become pros, and to think of pricing in a whole different way. And we're going to start next episode with the most interesting story ever. So you definitely don't want to miss it. Well, in the interim, if you are working on your pricing or if you have questions about this episode, please email me on hello@myfoodlens.com, or you could DM me on Instagram at Dyutama_myfoodlens. I'll be back with part two of this series. Until then, bye-bye.